Okay, today, finally, we're going to do part one of a two-part series where we review the World's Strongest Man 2017 contest in Botswana. Still to this day, I believe, and you can disagree with this, the most controversial World's Strongest Man in the history of World's Strongest Man, I believe. Maybe you guys can find something else, but I couldn't find anything more controversial around this. So I posed the question to you guys, the followers, the subscribers, the people who watch my video, because at the end of the day, you're the most important people to this channel. Do you think World's Strongest Man 2017 was fixed and engineered by the organisers, so that's Colin Bryce, Darren Sadler, and other people, for Eddie Hall to win? Are Thor Bjornsson's claims true that he was robbed? So, fantastic. 711 votes. Thank you so much for that. There was 22 comments. This was quite a heated discussion. Now, 25% said yes and 75% said no. So overwhelmingly, most people disagree with Thor's claims and believe that Eddie Hall won it because he was the strongest man. Simple as that. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to analyse both the qualifying and the finals and just generally background information and trying to analyse, was there any element of this being rigged or fixed or engineered, World's Strongest Man 2017? And was there any sort of prejudice against Thor Bjornsson and favouritism towards Eddie Hall? Is there any evidence of that? And really just put this issue to bed once and for all, because I think it's time to move on. Eddie and Thor are pretty much responsible for this being dragged out for so long. Mainly Eddie Hall. I'd say about 90% Eddie Hall. You know, there was the fight, and then there was the comments on ESPN published all over the internet by Thor that he was robbed, and then there was the 501 deadlift where Eddie said it's not real, he's a home gym hero. There was so much trash talk. I mean, to be honest with you, if Eddie had just let it go, it probably would have all blown over in a couple of months and it just would have been the past. But Eddie kind of dragged it out and Thor reacted, as he should do, really. You shouldn't really let people talk trash about you online. So anyway, let's get started on this video. So, where do we begin? So, as you can see from this photo right here, this is not a very happy photo. This doesn't look like, sorry, I just banged the mic. This doesn't look like your typical World's Strongest Man podium photo. Now, I know a couple of people who were there that year, and I spoke to them, and they described it as the tension. You could feel the tension, you could cut it with a knife, the tension between the three of them. It was incredibly intense, more so than any other year, and with exception to Eddie Hall, generally no one looked very happy to be there, and no one really wanted to stand on that podium for too long. So as you can see from the faces, nobody really looks overwhelmed about it. Now, the hand issue was another thing. Did Thor Bjornsson shake Eddie Hall's hand? Yes, he did. But Eddie put his hand out first, he waited, there was a bit of a long pause there, and then eventually Thor realised, I've got to shake his hand. But he didn't do it, you know, with a smile on his face, and he didn't do it willingly. And it's normally tradition that, you know, that the people who finish second and third shake the winner's hand. You know, you engage that shake. It's sportsmanship, it's trivial, it's small, it's pathetic, but it's just part of the sportsmanship of World's Strongest Man. But, you know, Eddie clearly had a bit of an issue with that. I don't think Thor really thought too much of it and looked into it too much. And again, even when the trophy raising, nobody seems too happy. So I can safely say that I don't think the favourites that year, Brian Shaw, Eddie Hall and Thor Bjornsson, were too pleased with how Botswana all turned out. Pretty much from the get-go, from when everyone arrived at Botswana, you could feel like something was off. Someone who was there described to me that something wasn't right. It didn't feel like your normal World's Strongest Man. It just didn't feel right. The energy of the whole competition seemed very uncomfortable, and I've got footage of that to prove that later in this video. So the qualifying events were as follows. Now, you must remember this was during a time when different groups had different qualifying events. There were variations, something I completely disagreed with for many years. I thought that it should be standardized. All 5 groups should do the same events. I thought that's more fair. So there were static events where the squat, for reps, the log, the deadlift, and the axle press for reps. The moving events, the more dynamic events, was the load and drag, elephant carry, the bullion toss, the truck pull, and the fingers. And then anyone then they had the last man standing, the stone off, for everyone with exception to the person who finished first in their qualifying group. So interesting events. I would say there's quite a few static events, more so than I've seen in previous years, but again, quite a few moving events there. I call them moving events. So what did Eddie have? Now, if you were to ask me for my personal opinion based on my analysis, I would say that Eddie got the best events in his group, and his group had the best events. I personally think that, I don't know whether that was just luck of the draw, or whether that was maybe engineered that way. I don't know. But quite frankly, Eddie missed out on the squat event, which is good because the squat event was also in the finals, so you don't really want to be doing that 2 times in a short space of time. He had the log lift, which is far more preferable than the axle press for reps. Now, I know you're going to say he held the axle press world record, yes, but that was for max weight. I think Eddie was a better log lifter than axle presser when it came to reps. So I would say the log lift is easier and less awkward than an axle press when it comes to reps. So he also had the deadlift rather than the squat, which is Eddie's event. He said that time and time again, it's my event. Nobody else is going to take that from me. So the moving, he had the load and drag. Everyone had to do that. Now that event should have suited him. He should have done better, but he didn't have the technique right with the mining cart drag. We'll talk more about that later. He missed out on the elephant frame carry, which was really, really, really lucky. That was, I believe, about 200 kilograms, and it was an absolute bitch, and it was for max distance. So potentially you could find yourself carrying that for forever. You know, if you have someone who's good at that frame carry and you need to win that event, you could be draining energy out of your body, finding yourself completely fatigued and worn out for the finals. So Eddie was super lucky to miss out on that. I would say he's very lucky. And instead he had the truck pull, which is definitely more of an Eddie Hall event, which he won with ease. And then he also had the bullion toss rather than the fingers, which I would say was a good thing, because the bullion toss, the gold bars were actually very light. There was more bars than you would normally see with the kegs and the kettlebells, more volume in terms of more bars to throw, but they were definitely light and maybe a little bit awkward to throw, but generally it wasn't a very taxing event. I thought it was too easy, if anything. And the fact that Eddie didn't have to do the fingers, which was great, because you can seriously injure yourself on the fingers. We saw that with big loss in the past. And also it tends not to suit the smaller strongmen, because you've got smaller levers, smaller arms. So this event isn't an Eddie Hall event. He would have had to exert a lot of energy to do well in this event, to get a top 3 finish in this event. So he was very lucky that he dodged a bullet with that. So I would say that Eddie had a pretty good group with good events. I think he had the best event. Now, was that fabricated? Was that engineered that way? I don't know. There was speculation about this. I did hear at the time that people were sort of eyebrows were raised at how he kind of had probably the easiest events for his group. But whether that was just luck of the draw, I don't know. But at least we can safely say that he did have a good group and good events in his group. And as you can see with the axle press, for example, you know, Benzel actually tore his bicep or to his tricep or his pec or something. It's a really awkward piece of equipment. And if it's for max, then slightly easier, but if it's for volume, it's really, really awkward. And the log is just so much easier. And this was that horrible frame carry. This individual, this athlete who I've never seen again, he had to actually pull out and withdraw due to an injury. And that's how brutal this event was. Terry Hollands did the event. He just said, I'm not even going to try it. I'm just going to pick it up, do the bare minimum, and drop it, because I don't want to injure myself. I don't want to waste energy on this thing. And as you can see, that's exactly what he did. The squat, as you can see, again, very awkward piece of equipment. It rolls on the back. It's got these awkward bumper pads that really throw the bar off if you hit it the wrong way. It was just really uncomfortable and really awkward. I mean, imagine having that bar on your back for 1 rep. Now we're talking about as many reps as possible in 60 seconds. I believe it's about 160 kilograms. It's the same weight as it was in the final. And even people like Dimitar, who's a kind of a circus strongman, he couldn't even do it. Martins Lisis did quite well in the event, but as you can see, the second Icelandic giant didn't even bother. Just couldn't do it. Peterson just gave up. And these were the fingers. You can see Tom on the left there, Tom Stoltman. It definitely suits someone who's taller. I mean, can you imagine Eddie doing this at, what was he, 6'1", 6'3", something like that? Now, ironically, Belshak, the shortest guy probably in strongman at the time, he did really well on this event. But that, I don't know how, he's just got incredibly good pressing power. And I think he used that to his advantage in this event. But as you can see, you exert a massive amount of energy, especially if you're shorter and you're smaller. You have to work a lot harder than someone like Brian Shaw or Hathor Bjornsson on this event. It's a real drain of power, and you can see that in Belshak right now. He's really having to dig deep just to get these fingers up. It's not easy. And that weight is, if it falls on your shoulder, that's it. Like we saw with Big Loz, you're out. Game over. So in terms of the qualifying group, could we say that Eddie had the best qualifying group? Now, I would say yes. Now, again, was this engineered? I don't know. Was it just pulling names out of a hat and just luck of the draw? Possibly. Now, I believe Eddie had the easiest group. I believe Brian Shaw had the toughest group. And let's have a look at the three favourites, because let's be honest now, there were really just three favourites going into this event: Shaw, Thor, and Eddie. So Brian had a tough group. There was a lot of competition in that group. JF Caron, Tom Stoltman, Matthias Belshak, and Mark Felix and Con Wolf, who was an absolute beast that year. He did really well on the drag, the cart drag. He had the mass, he had the size to be competitive. So I would say, that's a really tough group, especially JF, Belshak and Stoltman were there to take points away from Brian. Whereas when we look at Eddie's group, all he has is Matthias Kieliszkowski. And I mean, no disrespect to anyone else in that group, but realistically, even Eddie said himself, I've got one competition. There's only one person I need to stay ahead of, and that's Matthias Kieliszkowski. Ari Gunnarsson was a great strongman, but didn't really pose a threat to Eddie, and nor did Laurie Nami, nor did Derek DeVaughn, nor did Gerhard van Staden. I don't think any of these guys really posed a big threat to Eddie in making sure that he won the group, with exception to Matthias Kieliszkowski. So Thor had a pretty good group as well. I mean, there was Lisis, who was absolutely on fire. There was Peterson, there was Dimitar, Luke Stoltman, but realistically, the two biggest competitors that were a threat to him in this group was Martins Lisis, I would say, and Luke Stoltman. Personally, I believe those two were the greatest threats. So when I look at the groups, if I was to place Eddie in Group 1, would he have still won it? Yes. But would he have had to work a lot harder to win it? Yes. If I put him in Group 2, would he have still won it? Yes. But would he have had to use a lot more energy to win that group? Yes. And he would have also had events that didn't necessarily suit him. So I would say personally that Eddie probably had the best group. I would call the easy group. I would say Brian found himself in the death group. I'd say Group 3 was a tough group as well, because you had Janashia, Mikhail Shivlikov, you had Lawrence Charlet, Rob Kearney, Johan Els, Mikhail, I mean, that was a tough group as well. Group 3, that was a tough group. Eddie was lucky to miss out on that group as well. So if you were to ask me personally, for my personal opinion on my observation, this isn't truth per se, I would say from my analysis, Eddie had the best qualifying group in terms of the athletes he had to go up against and the events. Now, whether that was engineered that way, based on favoritism, based on you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back agreements between him and the organisers, I don't know. Or whether that was just luck of the draw, I don't know. I mean, you must remember as well, Eddie had done a lot for strongman at the time in terms of raising the brand, raising awareness of strongman, bringing people to the sport, making it more popular. Did he deserve to have a better qualifying group that year? Yes, he did. He did a lot of work to make strongman what it is today, to really make it popular and mainstream. Him and Thor worked really hard together to raise the brand of strongman, which is why I think they found themselves in some pretty good groups. I think that that's quite fair, personally. I think if you work hard, you bring a lot to the sport, you deserve to have a slightly easier qualifying group. But you can disagree with that statement entirely. That's entirely up to you. So now let's actually look at the events for Eddie Hall and just analyse the qualifying performances. So this was the athletes. Kieliszkowski was his closest threat. So let's have a listen.
Matthias Kieliszkowski was in my group. He was the one I'm most worried about. He came last on the first event, which was, to me, as long as I was ahead of him of every event, I was still going to come in first in the group going into the final. And that was all I needed to do. Make sure going into the final I was in the number one spot. First event in the heat was the load and drag. Now this is an event for me that I thought I was going to do very well in because of my body weight. It turned out I came fourth.
So actually, that was a lot of luck for Eddie there, because really Matthias Kieliszkowski just gave up with time left on the clock. If he had not given up on that mining cart drag, which was 683 pounds, if he had just maybe had a bit more maturity at that point in time, he would have definitely jumped Laurie Nami and potentially jumped Eddie Hall. So he was just lucky, Eddie, that Matthias Kieliszkowski, just due to maybe just immaturity and lack of experience, he just gave up. So that was a bit of luck for Eddie, and this kind of put him in a better position going into the next event, which was definitely a favourite for Eddie. It was a 348 pound log press. So let's have a listen to what he has to say.
That's a banker event for me. Any overhead, I'm almost guaranteed to win it.
In the log press and the heats, me and Kieliszkowski went head to head.
So Eddie got this all wrong. He was going into this with the concept of conserving energy. That was what it was all about. So he was only looking to beat Matthias Kieliszkowski by just one rep. He knew that that was really his closest competitor. So what he did is he just went too slowly. He was just too cautious and was just taking way too much reps. What he should have done is just said, I'm going to go out and do 8 reps, stop there and see where I am. But instead he kept looking over after finishing every rep to see what Matthias Kieliszkowski is doing. This is a rookie mistake and it cost him points, because what happened is Matthias Kieliszkowski did not give up and Eddie had to therefore share points with him, which was a real disappointment because this was a banker event for Eddie. He should have won this. He should have taken the full points, but instead he had to share. And that was just due to the fact that he was going too slow and being too cautious. So as you can see here, Kieliszkowski and Eddie are tied on points. But luckily for Eddie, no one else really came close to the two of them. Gunnarsson and nobody. The closest was 4 reps, which is not really much of a battle for Eddie. So going into the next event, he knew he had to pick up the pace a lot, because right now he's in second place behind Ari Gunnarsson. So in the bus pool, Eddie did really well. And also I think there was an element of luck here, because Matthias Kieliszkowski hadn't quite got the technique right for the bus pull or plane pull. He was still trying to understand how to do it properly, just due to lack of experience. But if Kieliszkowski had approached this bus pull the same way he approached the plane pull in the finals, then he would have won this event. He would have beaten Eddie, which would have put Eddie in second place on the back foot once again. So he was just lucky. Again, Eddie was just lucky that Kieliszkowski was still learning as he was going, because otherwise I don't think he would have beaten Kieliszkowski in this event. So after 3 events, he's tied. He's only 0.5 of a point ahead of Ari Gunnarsson, which is really not where he wants to be. He thought that he'd be clearly leading after 3 events. So in the next event, it's the deadlift, which lucky for him was another banker event. It's only £770, and he only had to go for 1 minute, which is really not a lot for him. So he knew what he needed to do. Luckily, because he won the previous event, he went out last, so he knew exactly how many reps he had to do, so he didn't have to use too much energy to beat anybody, like go out and do 10 reps to make sure that he wins the event. So he only did 1 more than he needed to do, so that was a bit lucky that Eddie didn't have any other good deadlifters in his group. If he had maybe JF Caron in his group, or let's say Brian Shaw, then he would have been pushed to his limits. He would have had to do at least 7-8 reps, maybe even more. So again, a little bit of luck there from Eddie, that he didn't have a lot of good deadlifters in his group, and that Kieliszkowski wasn't necessarily the greatest deadlifter, his closest competitor in the group. So now he's pulling away on points, going into the final event in terms of not the last man standing. He has the bully and toss. He only needs to do, I think, like 3 bars or something, and then he's through to the finals without having to do the last man standing. Let's have a listen to what he has to say.
How does the golden bars differ from maybe things that have happened in years past, whether it be the keg toss or last year with the kettlebell?
Well, it's a completely different implement. The thing is with this, it's a lot more shoulder power. You have to really force it up with the delts. Whereas the keg is a lot more technique, a lot more swinging it out.
So again, this was lucky for Eddie that this year they chose the bullion toss instead of the keg toss or the kettlebell toss, because these weren't good events for Eddie. He didn't quite have the technique right. He's not gifted like Thor or Brian at these toss events. He's on the back foot when it comes to these events. He's not the tallest athlete. He doesn't have long arms. He doesn't have long legs. He's not very explosive in terms of throwing. So luckily for him, it was the bullion toss, which, as Eddie said, is really more about delt and shoulder power, which is something that he has a lot of, or he had a lot of in 2017. Probably the strongest shoulders in strongman, maybe even the world. So this was a good event for Eddie. It meant that not only did he have to not throw all 8 bars because he was in a good position going into this event, they also weren't very heavy. Only started out at 39 pounds. It's not a big challenge for someone like Eddie Hall. So he was very, very lucky that he had, firstly, a bullion toss instead of a keg toss, and secondly, he really didn't have to do any more than two bullion tosses, 2 golden bar tosses. So he was very lucky. He managed to get through without having to do the last man standing, which is exactly what he wanted. He cleared Kieliszkowski by quite a few points, which was good, but not as much as I thought he would. I thought he would really dominate this group. I thought he'd do significantly better than he actually did. So going through to the finals is, as Eddie predicted from day one when he turned up, it's Kieliszkowski and Eddie Hall. So basically, from my analysis from doing all of that, I would say that Eddie did have a pretty easy group because he made a few mistakes and yet he still managed to win his group, even given the fact that he held back way too much on the log press. He also didn't do as well in the load and carry event, the first event, the load and drag event. So the fact that he made 2 pretty big mistakes and still managed to win the group just goes to show that it really wasn't much of a challenge for him. So Brian's group was probably the toughest group. We're going to just blitz through this because that's not really the objective, to study this one too much. So as I said earlier, he had, I would say, 4 competitors who were challenging him for the spot at the top. Belshak was really strong in 2017. Felix was a good deadlifter, good static puller. JF Caron was well-rounded. Tom Stoltman was young, upcoming, tall, genetically gifted. So this was a tough group. Brian knew he'd have to go in with a different mindset than what he would normally have, which is, I'm just going to go and give 60% and save my energy for the finals. This is the first time probably in his career he's had to really go out and really push the limits in the qualifying groups. In previous years, he's always held back and just kind of gave 60% because he never really had much of a challenge in the groups previously. But now he had to step it up. So in the load and drag, he lost to JF Caron, which was shocking considering Brian is much bigger than JF and much heavier. And that was surprising because I thought that this was a banker event for him. He then went out to the log lift. Now, Brian's got a good overhead, but when it comes to Belshak and Caron, he just doesn't quite match up to them. So he finished joint second. He had to share points with JF. This is not where he'd want to be. That's not what he would have had planned for. I think he would have planned to take second place and not have to share points. Now, the Fingers was a banker for Brian as well. He's very tall. He's got long levers. He's got the mass. He's got the size. He had to win this event. It was non-debatable. He had to go out and do the quickest time, all the fingers in the quickest time, and that's exactly what he did. He needed the win in this event. And weirdly, the shortest guy in the group finished second. which was surprising. But then Tom Stoltman did have an injury, and so did Mark Felix. So at this point, Brian's quite lucky because 2 of his closest competitors have had to withdraw. So that just leaves Belshak and Caron, realistically, who could challenge him for that top spot. Now, he's not far ahead. He's only 1.5 points ahead of Belshak, which is, again, not where he'd want to be after 3 events. So he knows he's going to have to step it up now and really use more energy than he'd like to, because the next event is the deadlift. And he's going up against one of the best at the time, which was JF Caron, one of the best deadlifters around in 2017. And once again, he's in an unlucky position where he has to share points with JF. And Belshak was only 1 rep behind anyway, so he was really pushed there when you consider what some of the other athletes did for the deadlift. I mean, what Eddie did 4 reps, so he did half of what Brian had to do with the same weight. So that just goes to show how hard Brian had to work in this qualifying group. And then after 4 events, he's starting to pick up a bit of a gap. He's got a couple of points now. This is looking much better for him. So going into the next event, I believe it's the bullion toss. Now, this is a Brian Shaw event. He's really good at these sort of keg toss, bullion toss, kettlebell toss, anything, sandbag toss. He's good at these events. He knew he could win this, but I'm sure he didn't want to go out and throw 8 bars. I'm sure he would have liked to have just done the same what Eddie did, just throw 2 bars and save his energy. But JF Caron was hot on his heels. Belshak was also not far off in terms of the points. He knew he had to go out and set the best time and throw all 8 bars. And that's exactly what he did. He was the only one to throw all 8. So in the end, he got a pretty comfortable victory in his group, but he would have had to exert a lot more energy, effort, and mental stress to make it through than Eddie Hall had to, which is not what you want when you're going through to the finals. You want to be refreshed, you want to be fresh, you want to feel good, you don't want to have used too much energy in qualifying. None of that went to plan for Brian, unfortunately. So the next thing we're going to look at is Thor's group, which I would say wasn't as difficult as Brian Shaw's group. He had about, I would say, 2 close competitors who would rival him for the top spot, and that's Lisis and Luke. Although there were some other good athletes in the group as well. Stefan Peterson, Jimmy, good static athlete at the time. I don't know where he disappeared to be honest. Dimitar Sabatov, another good overhead presser. So it wasn't the easiest group, but it wasn't the toughest group. It wasn't the death group, that's one thing for sure. So the first event really was a banker for Thor. The biggest guy at the competition. He had to win this. He finished it. He finished the load and the drag, won the event quite comfortably, and that was really a real good start for Thor. That's exactly what he wanted, because the next event he wasn't aiming to win. He said he was looking for 3rd place. That was what he wanted. Because he won the last event, he went out last for this event, so he knew what he needed to do to get 3rd place, and he did exactly what he needed to do to take 3rd, just do 1 more than Luke. Now I think that was the right attitude, because he had the squat event going into the finals, so why do 12 reps and waste all that energy at 6'9" when you only realistically need to do 5? So why do so many more reps than you need to? So I think that was a sensible move from Thor, even though some people criticised him. But going into the next event, again, it was a Thor event. It was the bus pull. He was very good, and realistically the only guy in the group who would win this event. And he did. He won it quite comfortably. So that's another good chunk of points for him. So in fact, I'd say out of the 3 top guys, he's doing the best in the qualifying. His performance is on par. He is doing fantastically. He's not making the same mistakes that Eddie made, and he's not being pushed to the limit like Brian was. So this is looking good for him. So after 3 events, he's winning by 2 points, which is exactly what he would want. Maybe a few more, but that's good enough. He's had 1 athlete have to withdraw, but that wasn't a big deal because he really wasn't posing any sort of threat to Thor, so it doesn't really matter if he had to withdraw. Dimitar wasn't really much of a threat to Thor. So the axle press is the next one. Now the axle press is a tough event. I'm sure he would have preferred the log, but he won the event. He was quite lucky to win it though, because Martins Lisis was gunning for that 4th rep, but unfortunately he had a sternum injury, which meant he had to drop the weight straight away and settle for 3 reps. So Thor was quite lucky there that he didn't have to chase a 5th rep. So far it's worked out perfectly, right? And at this point, you know, as you can see, this was the standoff between Lysis and Thor. I mean, Thor's on a different level, but I really like the split jerk technique that Lysis applied there. That was really cool. No one else was doing that. Everyone was just doing your typical bog standard push press. So at this point, he's got a good lead on Lysis, which is exactly what he wants after 4 events. I think that it's pretty much gone to plan for Thor at this point. And then he's got the bullion toss the next event. This is another banker for Thor, but he knew at this point he didn't have to do all of them. He didn't have to win the event. He could just settle for 3rd place, and that's it. So that's exactly what he did, and that's a smart thing to do. There's no point showboating and using energy when you don't need to. So my analysis after analysing the top 3 guys and all groups, all events, I would say, I think we could all agree that probably Eddie had the best group out of the 3 top guys who were realistically chasing World's Strongest Man 2017, which is Thor, Brian and Eddie. He also had probably the best events for him in his group, and also overall I think he had a good selection of events for his group that wouldn't test him too much. But I would say the best performer in qualifying out of the 3 of them was Thor. I think he was the best performer, the best athlete during qualifying. I think he did better than Brian. I think he did better than Eddie, which is why I thought after the qualifying had finished, I thought, wow, this is Thor's year. He did really well in qualifying. But that wasn't meant to be. So whether you agree with me or not, I don't think it was fixed that way. I just think that's just the way it is. Now, whether Eddie having the best group and the best events for him and overall was engineered that way, or whether it was just luck of the draw, I don't know, and I'll never know. But we can safely say that Eddie had a very good group, and he also had great events for him personally and a great selection of events overall that wouldn't tax him too much, thus affecting his performance in the finals. So stay tuned for part 2 of this series. Thanks for watching. Click that subscribe button to make sure that you keep up to date with all things strongman. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it.